Well, welcome everybody. The Office of Programs to Enhance Neuroscience Workforce Diversity within the National Institutes of Neurological Disorders and Stroke is very pleased to welcome you to the Open Stage webinar series. This is a targeted outreach effort for our diverse neuroscience community to learn about NINDS programs and network with NIH and NINDS program staff. This month, we are very excited to have with us NINDS staff from the Office of Research Quality, who will speak on applying research rigor and transparency best practices to neuroscience. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items. So, as a reminder, all attendees are muted. This is a webinar, but you are welcome to post comments in the chat. If you have a question, though, please do submit your question using the Q&A function. You can upvote questions and we will ask them at the end. There will be plenty of time for Q&A. Also, as a reminder, again, it's being recorded and it'll be transcribed and archived on our website. You can enable closed captions under live transcripts at the bottom of your screen. And don't worry about, taking frivolous notes. Everything is recorded. We're going to send you the slides, the recording, a whole bunch of resources in an email afterwards to all registering. So it'll share everything that you need to know that is shared today. So please do stay connected with us. Feel free to email us if you have any questions about this series or anyone at NINDS. With that, I'll pass it off to Dr. Shai Silverberg to get us started.
Thank you, Anna. And thank you all for joining this Open Stage webinar. I'm Shai Silverberg. I head the Office of Research Quality, and I'm joined here by my colleagues, and we're all going to be taking part in presenting this topic of enhancing the value of research findings. So I'll start by giving you some general background on why we need to enhance the value of research findings. And then Tish Wagan from the Office of Training and Workforce Diversity Development, and Mariah Hoy and Devin Crawford from the Office of Research Quality will describe some of the initiatives that are ongoing at NINDS to try to improve the quality of science. But before I start, I have a disclaimer to make for all of us, and that is opinions we voice are not official opinions of NIH. That keeps us out of trouble. So in the last 20 years or so, there have been a slew of papers published that suggest that there are probably issues with the quality of research produced by the academic community. Just a small sample of these papers are shown here. And I want to draw your attention to two of the titles here that include the word bias. And since we will be talking about bias throughout at least my part of the presentation, it's important that we'll all be on the same page. So I was looking for an official definition of the kind of research bias we're talking about. And the best I found is this one, which says the fact that results of research or an experiment are not accurate because a particular factor has not been considered when collecting the information. This is not a perfect definition, but what's important about it is there's no blame associated with it, okay? We're not talking about fabrication, falsification, and all these other things that might happen. We're talking here about just errors that can occur because perhaps their experiments are not appropriately designed. Now, the idea that bias can creep into science is by no means new. 400 years ago, Francis Bacon wrote, once a man's understanding has settled on something, it draws everything else also to support and agree with it. He went on to write, it is an innate and constant mistake in the human understanding to be much more moved by and excited by affirmatives than by negatives. Now, he uses the term understanding, which means obviously our brains, and he suggests that we are prone to these unconscious biases. So I want to give you a contemporary example. So this is an interesting experiment that was conducted about 10 years ago, and it involved third-year veterinary medical students. Now, the students were shown two videos of pigs in a pen, and they were told that one group were just the regular kind of fattening pigs that the farmers graze, and the other were pigs that were bred to be more socially friendly. And they were supposed to tally the negative and positive social interactions of these pigs in the two different pens. Now, this is, of course, important for veterinary students because they have to read the body language of animals in order to try to figure out what might be the problem when they, when their problem is being raised about the animal. Now, the students were actually tricked here because there was no such thing as animals that were bred to be socially friendly. And it was actually exactly the same video. It's just the second video was a mirror image, and the lighting was slightly altered to suggest that it's actually a different pen of pigs. And half the class were told that let's say the pen on the left is the control animals, and the other half were told that the pen on the right is the control animals, okay? Now, when all was said and done, the students found that the so-called animals that were bred to be socially friendly showed more positive social interactions and less negative social interactions. Now, this obviously was not actually really happening, okay? So what's going on? Well, the students had expectation bias. They expected to find more positive behaviors and less negative behaviors, so they found them, okay? This is what's called unconscious bias or expectation bias. Now, there are many kinds of biases, okay? And so how do we address them? So I like the approach that was taken by David Ransohoff. He wrote that the reliability of a study is determined by the investigator's choices about critical details of research design and conduct. In other words, it's our responsibility as investigators to make sure that the experiments that we design, conduct, and analyze are done in the most kosher way possible, okay? But he does go on and say that bias is unintentional and unconscious. So how can we reconcile these two? If it's unconscious and unintentional, how can we be aware of it and account for it? Well, he provides a simple solution. What he writes is, the process of addressing bias involves making everything equal during the design, conduct, and interpretation of a study and reporting these steps in an explicit and transparent way. We have to make everything equal between comparison groups, except for that one parameter that we are testing, okay? So let's kind of talk about this a little bit. Let's pretend we're doing an experiment and we have a control group and there'll be a test group. And the two groups can be animals like we saw in the veterinary study. It could be cells, it could be blood samples, or any comparison you might think of, okay? So I think the very first thing that we learned from the veterinary student experiment that we need to do is to conceal the identity of the comparison groups. If those veterinary students didn't know which group was supposedly bred to be friendly, they would not have found an effect, okay? So blinding or masking, as it's called, during the design of the experiment, that means during the selection of animals for or samples for the different groups, during the actual experiment and during analysis, can really address many potential unconscious biases. The other important thing is to randomize the allocation of samples to the comparison groups. Randomization helps us to, I wouldn't say assure, but do our best to make sure that the both groups are equal, okay? In the sense that we did not favor one group over another somehow by the way we select the samples to different groups, okay? So that helps make everything equal, so to speak. Another thing we have to pay attention to is pre-specifying criteria for excluding samples. It won't be good if we leave it to the investigator to decide during the experiment or after the experiment which samples or results should be excluded from the analysis, because there unconsciously we can always come up with very good explanations why particular samples shouldn't be included, and that might bias the results. And last here on the list is predetermining appropriate sample sizes. This is incredibly important for two main reasons. One, if the sample size is too small, then there's a high likelihood that we can get a result which is simply due to chance. And the other is that when we have sufficiently large sample sizes, it helps us assure that the two groups are equal in every parameter except for the test, okay? Because the larger the sample, obviously the closer it is to the true average of the population. So the question now I want to ask is, do scientists report on these practices? So here's a study that was conducted about 10 years ago. And what they did is they looked at many publications of animal studies in 4 different neurological disorders: Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and stroke. And we will focus just on multiple sclerosis since it had the largest number of papers. And what they did is they asked, what did they report on? So out of 1,117 papers that were in multiple sclerosis, they found that only 16% blinded the assessment of outcome. Okay, that means the analysis was done in a blinded fashion. And only 9% reported on whether the animals were randomly assigned to comparison groups. And the last number is absolutely stunning. Only 2 papers out of 1,117 provided information on how they came up with the sample size. So clearly, this is just one paper of many that I could have presented that show that there is lack of transparency in reporting how things are done. But this doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't do it, okay? So can we tell if they did it or not? Well, it's not that simple, but there are some indications what might be going on. So in this study here, the investigators looked at all the publications that examined the effect of the immunosuppressive drug FK506 in experimental stroke. And each one of these papers got a quality score. So, for example, if the investigators reported on blinding, they got a point. If they reported on randomization, they got a point. If they reported on sample size estimation, they got a point. And they could accumulate up to 10 points, okay? And that's the quality score that's shown on the x-axis. On the y-axis, they plotted the efficacy of FK506 as it's reported in each one of these studies. And I think it's very clear from this figure that the fewer parameters that are reported, the greater the apparent efficacy of FK506, suggesting that lack of reporting is associated with lack of practice and that this lack of practice leads to bias. So this is not very encouraging, is it? But what leads to this practice? What's going on? Why aren't people reporting and why aren't they practicing measures to minimize the risk of unconscious biases? Well, there are many possible contributing factors, and I'm going to focus for the sake of time just on really just one, and that is this vicious cycle of perverse incentives. So we all know that the engine that drives science is funds. Without money, we can't do the science, right? So we need to get grant support. At the fuel that keeps this engine going are the publications. If we do not publish frequently, then we will not get our next funding and we won't be able to continue the research, okay? And preferentially, we would like our papers to be in high-profile journals, which means that they have to be novel, innovative, and significant. And this whole cycle of from one grant cycle to the next is only on average 4 years. So it's really not that realistic to have several papers in high-profile journals and create all this fantastic work. So what happens most likely is that investigators have to rush studies to publication. Studies that perhaps could have benefited from a larger sample size, a few more control experiments, or perhaps even a couple of experiments to try to disprove the hypothesis, not to prove it right. But they just don't have the time to do that. So they rush the studies to publication, and therefore we see lack of transparency and possibly lack of practice to assure high quality research. Now, obviously, that's not everyone, but we see that quite in many studies. So what I briefly told you is that there's a lack of transparency in reporting, very clear. And what do we need to do to address that? Well, what we need to do is to have very clear and I think also enforceable guidelines to increase transparency. And we need such guidelines for reviewing manuscripts and for reviewing grant applications. And we've done some activities in this domain, but I don't have time to describe them. What Tish will do, she'll talk to you about a pilot study that was done to increase transparency in scientific meetings. I also discussed the perverse incentives, and to change those, that's going to be very difficult. What needs to happen is to change the culture, and that's not an easy task to do. Mariah and Devin will describe a couple of initiatives that NINDS is doing to try to address this issue. And then finally, deficiency in experimental procedures, which can lead to risk of bias. To address that, what we need is education, better education in how to do good science, and to increase awareness. And that's why we're all very happy to present here today, because we're always happy to come and provide presentations and discuss these issues wherever we're invited. So with that, I'll pass the baton on to Tish, who will discuss the first topic on lack of transparency in reporting.
Thanks, Shai. I'm Tish Wygand, and I'm from the NINDS Office of Training and Workforce Development. And so when we're talking about transparency in reporting our data and our experimental procedures, one of the ideas that's been put forward to help maximize data transparency in at least our scientific presentations is to use what has been termed rigor icons. So as we know, when we're giving talks or showing poster presentations, there's limited space for experimental design details that we can include. And even though we don't include them and we end up sort of sacrificing them so we can show more data or other information, these details are really important for interpreting the data and for your audience to be able to assess the research quality. So an idea that's been put forward to help mitigate this is to use rigor icons. So if you look at the table here, we have listed on the left various rigor-related items, which Shai alluded to a little bit earlier, and proposed icons that could be used to represent what each item is. So you have a masked smiley face, and this would indicate blinding or masking was used. You have the dice that can show that the groups were randomly assigned, the N value showing that you did your power calculation ahead of time. And if you were going to have outliers or other data that you exclude, you could use the scissor icon. And so these take up obviously a lot less space than describing your experimental details in a narrative. So the way this could be used is if you look here on the right, you see a figure, and if you had your figure in your poster or your presentation, you could just simply tack on or cut and paste in the icons that are for the rigor-related items that you've addressed. So in this case, this experiment, it's indicated here that the data were collected in a fashion that was blinded, randomized, and that the sample size was calculated ahead of time. So the Office of Research Quality was looking for people to pilot the use of these rigor icons. And our office, the training office, was holding a T32 workshop a couple of months ago. And so what we were doing there was bringing together all of our T32 programs. There are 54 of them, PIs, trainees, so either graduate students or postdocs from each. And we invited them all to get together to discuss various scientific topics with a very strong emphasis on experimental design, stats, quantitative literacy, and rigor. We all came together and we thought this would be a great opportunity to pilot the rigor icons because the graduate students and postdocs who were invited were all going to be giving talks or poster presentations. So the way this worked was that we chose the rigor icons, which I've already described, and if trainees were going to be giving an oral presentation, we were able to share these rigor icons with them in an electronic format. They were then able to cut and paste the icons onto their slides for their presentations as relevant. If they were doing poster presentations, the Office of Research Quality had printed the rigor icons onto stickers, and we gave out the stickers to the poster presenters when they arrived at the poster session, and then they all went around and put the stickers onto their posters. And in general, this all went really well. It's a very simple way to include this information and to kind of increase awareness and have people focused on and thinking about rigor as we went through the time we spent together at the workshop. And you can see even if people who were presenting didn't actually talk through the way they designed their experiments or which rigor items they addressed, you could easily just look, as you can see on the right-hand panel, at some of their posters and see, oh, this was randomized or blinded. And so it made it more information, gave you additional information to consider as you were thinking about the data that they were presenting. So after the workshop, we wanted to think about some of the outcomes and how this went. I think the first thing that stood out to us that before we even left the meeting, there were T32 PIs that were coming up to us and saying, can you share these icons with us? Because we'd like to use them back at home at our institutions for journal club presentations or research in progress seminars. So we've been able to share those for people to use in an electronic form. And we also wanted to kind of get a sense for the overall response and see what people thought about the rigor icons. So we included a question in our post-workshop survey. And the question is here, did the use of the rigor icons and the presentations and posters influence the way you will think about your research in the future? And 65% of the respondents said, yes, this is going to influence the way they think about it. We also included a space for comments, and so people were very enthusiastically responsive. They really liked these icons. Those that said somewhat were also quite enthusiastic. I think there were a few that, as you can see here, that said no, they weren't going to consider this wasn't going to influence them in the future, but they commented, each of them said, the reason why this isn't going to influence me in the future is because I'm already doing this. This is something I'm already paying attention to. So overall, we thought this went over extraordinarily well, and it's something that we're going to continue to use in workshops that we host in the future.
Hi, my name is Mariah Hoy, and I'm a health program specialist in the Office of Research Quality. So beyond transparent reporting, enhancing the value of our research findings also requires changing the culture and shifting the focus to rigor and not glitter. So the problem is that the current incentive structure is not necessarily aligned with what we should value. And what we should value is high quality research, which is rooted in practices like transparently reporting our methodologies, taking measures to reduce bias, such as blinding or masking of experimenters, using appropriate data handling, and then publication of both positive as well as negative or null results. And yet, how we evaluate research and researchers is largely based in metrics, and especially bibliometrics. So things like the number of publications that an investigator has, the impact factor of the journal in which those articles are published, the amount of grant funding an investigator has, or their H-index, or the number of citations garnered by those publications. And so thus, there's really this disconcordance between what we should value and how we evaluate. Ultimately, realigning incentives with our values requires culture change. In this eLife 2020 paper, we in the community proposed establishing communities of rigor champions to lead grassroots efforts to enhance attention to rigor and transparency. Rigor champions are individuals from any career stage or scientific sector, as shown on the left, who are driving awareness of or improvements in rigorous research practices or transparent reporting, and really regardless of how big or how small the effort. I know there are a lot of trainees in the audience today, and so some examples of rigor champion activities that really help drive culture change are really simple things like establishing journal clubs or seminar series for discussing rigor and transparency practices, or campaigns to change policies for graduation requirements, such as including the publication of negative or null results. In 2022, we hosted a workshop to bring together rigor champions, and we really learned that we needed to create more incentives and more rewards for promoting research quality, and across all types of rigor champions, not just those who are typically eligible for grants. So ultimately, this led to the development of the NINDS Rigor Champions Prize. So this is a challenge mechanism, not a grant, where awards will be made based on past activities, so things that you've already done. The challenge is open to all rigor champions across the various sectors of the scientific ecosystem. So that would include undergraduates, graduate students, educators, core facility managers, etc. Up to 5 cash awards of $10,000 each will be made. And really the purpose is to recognize and reward rigor champions who are driving culture change through improvements in rigor and transparency practices. So we're asking for 3 500-word essays detailing your championship and commitment of the activity that you're describing, the significance of the activity as it relates to rigor and transparency, as well as the impact that the activity has had on the community in which it was implemented. So there does need to be this aspect of culture change and going beyond you and your own experiments. You can submit an entry either as an individual or as a small team of up to 5 individuals. And the deadline is quickly approaching. It's August 15th at 11:59 p.m. EDT. And if you'd like to learn more, we have an informational video on our NINDS YouTube page, the link which is posted there. And then I've also put the link to the challenge near the title. And then I think someone just put it in the chat, but that has all of the details on what to include in your submission and how to enter. So we are also hosting a professional development workshop at the annual SFN meeting entitled Doing Our Part to Change the Culture of Science, Becoming a Champion for Rigor. So this will be held on Saturday, November 11th from 12 to 2. And really this workshop will just showcase the various ways in which individuals can champion rigor. So we're going to have a panel of speakers from early career researchers who are leading journal clubs for discussing things like rigor, all the way to department chairs who are changing the tenure and promotion criteria in their departments to really focus on research quality. Following the panel's presentations, we will break out into small table discussions, so we hope to see you there.
All right, great. The baton is now passed to me. Hi, everyone. I am Devin Crawford, and I am a program director in the Office of Research Quality, or ORQ, and I'll be continuing with the theme of changing culture. However, now we will be talking about institutions rather than individuals. So institutions affect things like whether or not you have a job, the space that you're working in, the infrastructure available to you, the colleagues around you, and all of these things to ultimately affect the culture of doing science. And recognizing this, Begley and colleagues wrote in 2015 that institutions must support and reward researchers who do solid, not just flashy science, and hold to account those whose methods are questionable. So generally, the scientific community recognizes the institution as one important focus for incentivizing good science. And for this reason, we have released a new funding opportunity called the NINDS Sustainable Transformation of Institutional Research Rigor, or STIR program, which utilizes an RC2 mechanism. And this initiative will establish programs to enhance research rigor and transparency practices within academic and research institutions in order to promote a culture of high-quality neuroscience research. And this funding opportunity is meant to support an individual department, office, or other intra-institutional entity. So this is not at the level of the entire institution, but rather at a more local level within the institution. And since we are NINDS, we will also focus on entities that have a critical mass of neuroscientists that will benefit from the program. So, for example, at least some labs within a department would need to be performing research within the NINDS mission space in order to be eligible to apply. And finally, there is a 3-year limit to the award, since it should be kickstarting a new program rather than sustaining an already successful program. And these are some of the important features for the programs eligible for STIR. So we would like to see some creative solutions that actually improve rigor and transparency by integrating new behaviors into the culture within an institution. Of course, we want to see evaluation and dissemination, and we'd also like to see a consideration for sustainability and scalability. So overall, we want to identify successful programs that could spread to other entities inside or outside of the awardee institution, thereby potentially changing the culture on an even bigger scale. And we envision that we will support a variety of types of programs under this initiative, ranging from more focused to broader activities. For example, we could see applicants propose to implement recognition and awards to incentivize good practices, appointing dedicated specialists to help, altering trainee program requirements, or even hiring promotion and tenure requirements, policies to actually enforce rigor and transparency better, SOPs, new infrastructure, new educational or professional development programs, or even partnerships with outside entities that will help transform how the institutional entity actually operates. And these are just example ways that institutions can make tangible changes to try to shift culture. Now, in case this might interest you or your university, you should know how to apply. So the link is provided here, but you just sort of need to Google the funding opportunity number that I've listed here. That's that RFA NS 24020. And be aware that the first receipt date's coming up in a couple of months. It's October 17th of this year. Okay, so now I'm going to shift a bit and speak briefly about one of our initiatives to improve education and awareness of rigorous research practices. So now it's clear that awareness is needed first for any of these cultural changes that we talked about to be effective, as illustrated by this quote from John E. Needis and colleagues in 2014, saying that little evidence exists about the research training of laboratory scientists. The way that many laboratory studies are reported suggests that scientists are unaware that their methodological approach is without rigor. So this suggests that training in the principles of rigorous research could improve scientific practice and reporting. Now, there are a number of reasons that courses and training programs in rigorous research principles could be difficult to implement. But one reason is that the activation energy is very large to build a program from scratch. People need things like time, expertise, funds to build courses like this. However, if there were a free educational resource that was, say, comprehensive, modular, adaptable, and upgradable, well, then this could serve the needs of institutions and investigators while at the same time reducing that activation energy to implement it. And for these reasons, we have created an initiative to build such a resource by and for the scientific community. So overall, the purpose of this initiative in more explicit terms is to facilitate teaching and learning of fundamental principles of rigorous biomedical research. And we're doing this by developing an innovative online educational resource. And we want this resource to be useful for a broad range of scientists across multiple career stages. And we also want the resource to be useful in an array of learning environments. Now, the resulting educational resource itself will be online, freely available, user-friendly, engaging, all of these things we talked about earlier. And by the end of 5 years, there should be about 30 to 50 educational units integrated into the resource. And an educational unit, by that we mean an assortment of materials that collectively address a single principle of rigorous research. And we want these educational units to have all of the features listed here, including both breadth and depth about the principle, why it's important, not just how to implement it, as well as real-world examples and interactive activities. So central to this initiative is the collaboration between awardees from a pair of funding opportunities. There's Center, or Creating an Educational Nexus for Training and Experimental Rigor. You don't need to remember that. As well as Meter, which is Materials to Enhance Training and Experimental Rigor. And so the Center is more or less leading the initiative, and the Meters are more or less creating the educational content for the initiative. And they're working together to create effective materials that the community actually wants to use. And importantly, this resource will be adaptable to different contexts. For example, it will be customizable for classroom teaching. We want teachers to be able to tailor their curricula, as well as swap out the scientific examples with ones that are most relevant for their students. The resource will also be good for modular self-paced learning. So an individual should be able to direct their own interaction with the content, as well as pick out content that is differentiated to their baseline level of understanding. And the resource will also be good for individual guidance in the laboratory. So this could be individual mentor-mentee teams, or just an individual scientist looking for, say, useful resources or practical suggestions quickly in the laboratory. Now, excitingly, we launched this initiative exactly 1 year ago today. The first awards were awarded 1 year ago today. And the center awardee is Conrad Cording, the University of Pennsylvania, and his team, which is leading the initiative, has already launched a landing webpage at c4r.io if you'd like to check that out. And C4R stands for Community for Rigor, which is what they're calling their initiative now. And along with Center, at the same time, we awarded the first cohort of meter awardees who are creating educational units on topics like how to do systematic literature searches, how to randomize, how to pick proper controls, how to reduce confirmation bias. And now, as of today, a second cohort of meters is starting. And they're going to create units on topics such as transparent reporting, how to calculate sample size, how to share data properly, and how to reduce publication bias. But next year, there will be one more cohort of meter awardees. So please consider applying if you're an educator and this initiative is of interest to you. And if you're just interested in using this resource, keep an eye out for updates on how it's going. And here I've put some important information together for you, such as the final meter receipt date, which is October 10th of this year, October 10th, 2023, and the funding opportunity number, which is NS21033, which you can Google to find the funding opportunity, and we'll also provide links with this presentation in case you're interested in applying. I've also put here some websites to learn more about the initiative as it develops, as well as social media for both the NINDS Office of Research Quality, which is at NINDS for Rigor, as well as the center leading the initiative, which is at COM for Rigor. And you can follow us for updates in real time. So just taking a step back, our take-home messages for the entire presentation are fairly simple, that we really want to get across to you that rigor and transparency are fundamental for research, and that we at NINDS are here to help you be more rigorous and transparent. And with that, we will just say thank you, and we would be happy to take questions at this point.
Hi, so there is one question in the Q&A. Raina is asking if we can share an electronic version of the rigor icons. And yes, we're so happy to hear that you're excited. We can definitely do that. We're actually in the process of working with a graphic designer to up the visual appeal of those rigor icons. So we can also share those versions once they're finalized. But yes, thank you for your enthusiasm. I think Angel asks, has the NIH, NINDS thought to contact journals directly to see if the journals could encourage, incentivize these better research practices, blinding studies, et cetera, to groups submitting their work? And I think the perfect person to answer this question would be Shai.
Thanks, Mariah. So, one of the very first things we did in trying to improve rigor and transparency was to target the journals. How that came about, I mean, there were various reasons, but this already happened 10 years ago. So what we did is we organized a workshop with high-profile journal editors. And the idea was rather naive, but the idea was that if we can get the high-profile journals on board, others would follow. So we had a 2-day workshop in 2012, and we came out with recommendations. What would be the minimum set of items that need to be reported? and those are reflected in the rigor icons that you have seen during the presentation. And so we published a paper. The paper is, you're welcome to look at it. It's the Landis et al. Published in 2012. It was a perspective published in Nature. And it had a huge impact, actually. Within 8 months, Nature Publishing Group made significant changes to how they review manuscripts. They now have a very extensive checklist that they require investigators to fill. And they don't necessarily have to, to get the paper in, so have actually, let's say, blinded randomized, but they do have to report whether they did or did not. And that's a very important step forward because it leaves to the investigator, to the reviewer of the manuscript, the understanding, at least, how to look at the study and how much trust to place in the results. And this, by the way, led to NIH holding a second meeting with many, many more journal editors, and also coming to some kind of agreement with many publishers and journals, what they will do to increase transparency. So that's where we are in this space.
Another question we have in the chat is, are any of the modules available yet? This is referring to the educational resource, or still under development and to be released as a whole after the meters are done. So Devin, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I'm happy to take that one. So it is still pretty early in development at this point. We don't have any modules that are live, but in the coming months, the first module should be going live. And the idea is to be constantly iterating and improving. And so we want interaction from the community as we go. We don't want to just wait until funding has ended and they just dump the final resources on the internet. We would like interaction with the community to make sure the resources are actually good. So keep an eye out, because I'd say in the next 6 months, we may be seeing some of the modules go live.
So there are no more questions in the Q&A as of yet, but Devin did post the link to our website in the chat. So if you guys would like to learn more, that's a good place to go. I can also put the link for our Twitter handle. That's a great place to follow, like in real time, the things that we're doing. But I thought maybe some people would be interested in sort of what led to the creation of the Office of Research Quality, and a little bit more about the history, which, Shai kind of spoke about with the workshops and the Landis et al. Paper. But do you want to give a little bit more of the history, Shai?
Sure. So it was very interesting times, okay, as I alluded to, with all those papers that were, came out in the first decade of the 21st century. One thing that was one study in particular really hit close to home, and I didn't have time to discuss it. And it relates to ALS, the devastating motor neuron the degenerative disease. So apparently in 2002, a group of couple papers were published suggesting that the antibiotic minocycline can dramatically enhance the lifespan of a mouse model for ALS. It's the superoxide dismutase 1, or SOD1 mouse model. And this was very dramatic. So within 1 year, that means in 2003, NINDS funded a clinical trial to look at the effects of minocycline and ALS. And the results were published 4 years later, and it was found that there was no beneficial effects for humans. Now, there's no reason to think that it necessarily would be beneficial. What works in animals doesn't necessarily have to translate to humans. The issue was that a year later, in 2008, a paper was published by the ALS Therapy Development Institute. It's a nonprofit in the Boston area, where they spent 4 years very carefully evaluating more than 70 compounds in the SOD1 model. And what they found was that none of the compounds they tested in a very rigorous fashion had any beneficial effect, including several that were previously reported to be efficacious. One of the compounds was minocycline. In other words, when the study was done carefully, and then minocycline basically had no effect in animals, and there was actually no justification to hold that clinical trial in the first place. And in hindsight, we looked at the quality of the papers that led to the clinical trial, and there were clear issues with transparency and potential risk of bias, including also the possibility of chance observations because the sample sizes were relatively small. So this served as a really important milestone in the efforts taken by NINDS to try to improve rigor and transparency in neuroscience.
So another question is, are we able to help, or provide applicants with any guidance for how they could improve rigor in their applications?
I could take that question. I can see Shai looking at me, even though it's through Zoom. Yes, absolutely. We actually have a website specifically containing items of rigor or transparency that applicants should be considering when they're putting together their applications. Of course, not everything will be relevant to every study. For example, if you're first doing some exploration, then you may not be blinding because you're trying to find something worth exploring further with the hypothesis testing result. But these are items that can at least let you know what we're thinking when we're thinking of rigor and transparency. And you can put them in your application. You can consider them when you're designing your experiments to make it, the best experimental design possible. So that way your results are more likely to be valid.
Mariah, with your permission, I think, I would like to hear more what the training office is doing to increase attention to these items. And I know they're doing a lot.
Sure. I think in most of our programs, particularly the T32 programs that are in, if you don't know what those are, these are programs that are these are grants that are given to institutions to support graduate student or postdoctoral research training, and they'll train cohorts of students or postdocs all in one group. And so what we have required in all of those funding opportunities, we require robust training in rigor, scientific rigor, but also just principles of experimental design, statistical methodology, and a quantitative approaches to their research. So in the applications that come in, the programs are required to propose a suite of training opportunities or activities that they'll be providing for their trainees. And as they are progressing, once they are awarded, they need to update and tell us progress on what is going on there and how things are actually, how things are going. So at the T32 workshop that I mentioned earlier, we had all of the PIs for the T32s join together and have just a discussion and be able to exchange, sort of compare notes and exchange different ideas and approaches that they were taking and think about ways to leverage resources so they're not reinventing the wheel. But it's something that we constantly discuss at any opportunity that we have to engage with those PIs. And then same thing goes with the individual awards that we're funding. We have additional language that we've added to our F32, for example, and to our K awards. So, those individual awardees, as well as their mentors, need to talk about how rigor is being addressed in those labs and how it will be addressed in the projects that are proposed. And the reviewers are held to standards, right? They are expected and sort of educated about this before they go to study sections, so that they know these issues need to be addressed and these items need to be present, and I need to be convinced that it's not lip service and that it's real, in order for, you know, the review to proceed in a positive way, right? It's going to be a ding, so to speak, if those items are addressed. So it's something that we think about with everything that we put out the door. We talk about it all the time. We talk about it in the community, and I think it's, if we're talking about changing a culture, right, one of the best ways to do it is to sort of indoctrinate, so to speak, or to hit those that are coming up, the next generation, and maybe things will sort of start to creep in and become sort of commonplace as time goes on.
Yeah, thank you, Tish. That's great. I mean, I think one other thing, you know, that we could emphasize is just that I know a lot of the, you know, people in the audience today are trainees, and sometimes you don't feel empowered to, you know, I can't change the culture, I'm just a trainee. But all of these little nudges, all of these little efforts, you know, help contribute to that culture change. And so don't feel like just because you're a trainee doesn't mean that you can't make a difference, that you can't be a better advocate for research quality rather than some of these perverse incentives that we talked about. You know, breaking the cycle has to start somewhere. And so I hope you know, feel empowered to, you know, make those changes within your own research, but then to also help others do that as well. So yeah, so including that training as part of, you know, whether you're a T32 recipient or, you know, on an NRSA, I think is great.
And really pay attention to that challenge prize, because it's amazing what small actions can lead to in terms of culture change. Sometimes just putting together something as simple as a journal club, getting together with your fellow graduate students and talking about these issues, making your local community more aware of these things can actually create big change. And so that was one of the drivers behind developing that initiative, was to say, look, we're trying to reward these things because we feel these things are important. And so don't believe that you can't make change, because you can.
Yeah, those are great points. And what I would add to that is that what we discovered over the years is one of the most important things is increasing awareness. And the impact that, you know, if I or Devin, you know, have gone out and given presentations on these issues, the impact can be huge. You know, and we don't need, obviously, you know, if we go to an institution and give a talk, we don't expect everyone to suddenly change their ways. But if a handful do, that goes a long way. So we you know, we are always happy to go out and give presentations when we are invited, and it's a great way to, if you, for example, a trainee, and you're concerned that the faculty might not be hearing you when you say, you know, we need to do this or we need to do that, then having someone from NIH come and give a talk and setting the stage could go a long way.
Well, if there are no more questions, we can end a little bit early, and I can turn it back over to Anna, who will close us out. So thank you all again for coming today. We so much appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Mariah and the whole team. This was a really fantastic session. So many resources are shared. We will be very sure to send you everything, the recording, the resources, the slides. And really, this webinar is an opportunity to see the people behind NINDS and NIH that are working to help make a better scientific culture for us all. So we really appreciate you being here. And if you would like to kind of stay involved and up to date with any future open stage webinars or diversity related resources that we have, please sign up for our listserv. And with that, I will close this out. Look for an email, and we will see you next time. Bye.